Oh, Arthur?
No, it's Brian.
Oh, Brian. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. And Paul, good to see you as well. Just wanted to say I'm going to be leaving, but joining in about 20 minutes.
Ah,
You know Jeff Cree? Do you
uh,
remember him?
yeah.
Okay, he passed
Oh,
not too long ago, and there's a celebration of his life
uh,
on another Zoom conference that starts at 7, and I'm going to join that for a few and then jump back in. So,
okay, please send our condolences.
okay, very good.
Sorry to hear that.
Yep, take care. We'll talk to you a bit later on.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Yep, bye-bye.
Hello, Ron. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Marty. How things are going?
Pretty well as they can go during this period we're in. Strange period.
It is. I actually got an appointment for a COVID shot tomorrow.
Yeah, so am I. You got an appointment?
You got it,
Yep.
because I wasn't able.
No, I've been trying for since last Thursday.
So what was the trick?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. One of the hospitals that's affiliated with my health insurance contacted me via email today and said, would you like to get the shot? And they had about 6 locations. One of them's in the next town.
Wow.
And the first appointment was at 2:30 and I took it. So
Well, that's great. Actually, my clinic called me too, but they don't have anything right away.
right.
So
Right.
Joe,
Pat
Dennis,
Thompson's wife is getting it
Jonathan, yeah.
Saturday, I think, at the Leahy. So I guess they're giving it to hospitals now and healthcare centers.
Yeah.
So kind of a last minute thing, I guess, because they get a whole bunch more shots in, apparently. Or they have more coming for next week, so they're releasing stuff. So
I'll give you the 2-minute warning now.
No worries.
Oh, hi, Bill. Bill's connecting to audio.
Joe Torelli. Hello, Joe.
Edward Stewart. Dennis Dutra. Yeah. This is the electronic substitute for wearing those stick-on name tags.
I haven't seen some of these people in a while.
Yeah, it's always nice to see new people. Bill Rabkin is with us here. Bill has a production company here in Framingham. Hello, Tim. Tim is muted.
Do you want me to start screen sharing? Just so we're ready to go?
Yeah, it is now, as we used to say in the Coast Guard, 1900.
If you're in the Coast Guard, you probably know what I was playing with earlier.
Paul, we're going to start. Is tape rolling, recording, and up to speed? We're good. All right.
We are recording. You can begin.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Marty Feldman, section chair. This is the New England section of SIMTE. And by the way, we're going to be offering this, as we're now doing with just about all of our meetings, as a video on demand on our website, which is SIMTE with a hyphen and then NE, SIMTENE.org. And you can tell your friends, they can get on there and they can watch. We'll get the last several months on there. And so we intend, even when we get back to in person, we intend to continue to do this. And you're able to check out the meetings afterwards, because I know not everyone can make it, when we do it live. So tonight, the topic is the move to video over IP and networking. It's a pretty hot topic. Everyone's online somehow, and also there is a transition, I'm sure you're aware of it, of going video over IP pretty much in it, almost everything we do. It'll take a while. The transition may take 5 years to completely do that. We're actually going to have something specifically on that on May 19th, the transition of SDI to IP with Carl Kuhn. Many of you know Carl as being with Tektronix for years. And Tektronix, I guess, has merged somehow with Telestream. But I saw Telestream because that's in the addresses now. And I thought, well, what happened with Tektronix? But I guess they're all one company now.
They were acquired, yeah.
Yeah, they were acquired. And Carl is also a SIMTE governor for the East. And he's a great speaker. And so he'll be with us on May 19th. Let me give you a few other dates to note. Our next meeting is March 17th. And that's going to be a progress report on ATSC 3.0, which is ramping up. And that should be a good topic. We arranged it through atsc.org, but the speaker is Luke Fay from Sony, and I'm looking forward to that one. April 21st, we've got Mark Shubin. Most of you know Mark as the technical director of the Metropolitan Opera, who does the broadcast that they do into the theaters, and that's going to be one of the topics. But overall, the topic is called the fandom of the opera. That's his pun, not mine. And opera actually played quite a big role in the development of radio and then later television broadcasting. He goes into all of that. Should be a very good meeting. Again, that's April 21st. And in May, we will have that SDI to IP. And then we'll have one more meeting in June to be named yet. And that is our final of our season. We're off for the summer. We might have something special, but generally we're off July and August and then back in September. Tonight, I am really honored to have Graham Sharp with us. Graham is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Broadcast Pix. Broadcast Pix is a leading manufacturer of integrated production systems and is doing a tremendous amount in doing their products like Radio Pix in order to put radio stations on the air, streaming while they're broadcasting radio. They can also be doing television and many other products, all kinds of integrated production gear, studio in a box type of products. Graham in the past has been with both Avid and Grass Valley as well. And for those of you that got the email that we sent out, his full bio is on there, and I suggest you look it over. But he will be presenting tonight. So he, at Avid, he was the general manager of the video division and was vice president of corporate development at Grass Valley. So pretty experienced fellow. And we're thrilled to have him. And I am going to turn it over to him before I use up any more time. And so, Graham, it is all yours.
So thank you very much. Interesting, you got a tech guy. I started life at Tektronix in the 80s, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And we owned Grass Valley back then. And I sort of lived through the whole analog to digital, digital to serial, serial to IP, the transitions. It's amazing how, you know, how many transitions we've seen in the last 40 years. Contents, what are we going to talk about? I like to explain why, you know, we're doing things. So why am I talking about IP? And the reason is basically because, you know, as Broadcast Pix, we've moved more and more into an IP-based product. We're trying to make it easy for people to understand. So I ended up putting together a bunch of slides, trying to demystify video over IP. And a big part of demystifying it is just literally explaining what all of these acronyms mean and how they all fit together. Because I sit through numerous conversations, sales guys, customers, resellers, and they're all throwing out RTMP, RTSP, WebRTC, and they haven't got a clue what any of them mean or really how they relate to each other or how they should be used. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about, you know, why Broadcast Pix is so into networking. And then the rest of it is really trying to demystify the use of video over networks. I have a good friend. He does great training courses. He's got a great training course called Networking for Video Professionals. He agreed to provide a free token for everybody so you can go away and you can learn about how networking works in its bowels. You know, I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to talk about the higher level. But hopefully between the bit that I talk about and the bit that there's the free training course for, you should be able to become very knowledgeable about how video works over IP, sufficient to get systems running. So let me kick off and talk a little bit about our philosophy at Broadcast Pix. You know, we make integrated production solutions. The whole concept is to make it easy. Typically, everything in a box, it's easy to install, there's automation, blah, blah, blah. But the bulk of the way our systems work is they sit on a network. And the biggest source of support calls we get is networking issues. They're not really product issues, they're networking issues. So one of the things that I've added to our North Star, if you like, our strategy, is to try and educate as many people as we can about networking. So a typical system, this is a sort of image of our product lines. All of our product lines have the same, what I call abstracted architecture, and they're all network based. So the switcher core that does all the processing sits on the network. Could be local network, could be World Wide Web. Acquisition, it could be coming in from a Zoom call, it could be a camera, it could be PowerPoint, it could be any number of sources. They can all come into that switcher core through the network. Now, control surfaces, whether it's a physical panel or a software panel, application, or a web page, all come into the switcher core through the network. And in a similar way, when we finished building the show, it's streamed or presented outwards. Yes, of course, I can have a video spigot on the back of the chassis, but most of what we do these days is streamed out to the network. And it's multiply published to Vimeo, YouTube, Facebook. Maybe it feeds back into a Zoom video conferencing. Maybe it goes off to some sort of server, streaming server, a Brightcove or Wowser or somewhere. But as we've developed this architecture, we have totally become wedded to networking. It's at the heart of what we do. And it's the source of the most confusion. You know, everybody in video and television understands video. Very few people understand networking. Quite a few people do, but I would say not enough. And the problem you have is you're at this juxtaposition between the IT department and the video department. And typically the video guy doesn't know enough about IT, and the IT guy doesn't know enough about video. And therefore you end up with, well, why isn't my output streaming to YouTube? So I'm going to try and explain all of the sort of reasons and the different acronyms. And the next time you have a problem, exactly how you grab the IT guy and exactly where you insert the screwdriver to get him to make the system work. So why are we hurtling towards video over IP? Video, as we all know and love it, is a dedicated cable, dedicated interface. It's perfectly timed and synchronous within the interface. I know obviously sometimes you have to time things, but it's as a signal, it's perfectly timed within the interface, and it's full bandwidth. So why do we take this perfect system and stand it all on its head and try and put it over a general purpose network that's not dedicated and a synchronous network that's not perfectly timed? Why do we have to chop up the video to fit this crazy packetized network? And why do we have to compress it? Because there isn't enough bandwidth. So, you know, we take a very, very good solution that we've had for many years and we stand it on its head and we try and fit video into an imperfect solution. Well, the reasons are typically one of cost. The entire broadcast technology industry is about the same size as Hewlett-Packard's high performance computing division. I had the, I don't know, it was good fortune or bad fortune of doing some training down in Houston for Hewlett-Packard. And I was amazed how big that part of their business is. Wes, who does the other, you know, the course that I'm recommending you will go on, he says that it's the same as their printer division, which is also true. So Hewlett-Packard is twice the size, just with two divisions, of the whole TV business, technology business. So finally, what we're doing with IP is we're taking the advantage of the size and the scale of the IT industry. We're using consumer off-the-shelf technology, which is good value because of the volume sold. Typically, it's easy to install. So for example, with a IP camera these days, you typically only need a single Ethernet cable because it's bidirectional. You get video in one way, control in the other, and you get power over Ethernet. It's highly scalable. I can remember the days when people first built 1,000 squared router. Guess what? We don't care with networking. You can have as many inputs and as many outputs as you want on that network. It's secure, it's manageable. It takes advantage of the security and the management features of the IP system, which, remember, was developed for solutions that are 1,000 times bigger than what we're doing. Distance doesn't become an issue. I can extend beyond the facility and go anywhere basically in the world. It's very flexible and it's very quick to install. I can bring in digital files, other computer-based applications, and at the same time, there's a huge infrastructure out there that's readily available. And typically there's a large pool of knowledgeable technicians that know how to operate that IP network. Where they fall short is understanding some of the detail of how video fits into it. So many of you will be familiar with this, the OSI interconnect drawing, the Open Systems Interconnect Standard. This is a conceptual model that presents the communication functionality between two computing systems. It was standardized in the 80s after about 10 years of work, and it talks about different layers. Starting at the bottom, the physical layer, that's the cable.
You gotta be kidding me, we're gonna do this?
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Sorry, is that a question or?
No.
No, okay. Starts at the physical layer, which is the cables, the connections, even things like Wi-Fi, etc. And then you go up to a data link layer, a network layer, a transport layer, a session layer, a presentation layer, and at the very top, the application layer. So if I'm the computer on the left and I want to talk to the computer on the right, I go down the stack, and at each layer on the stack, I add basically additional header information so that by the time I get to the bottom, I can actually talk and I know where I'm going. And then as I come back up, it becomes more abstract. So for the purposes of this next hour or 45 minutes or whatever's left, I'm really only going to talk about the top 3 layers. Layer 7, layer 6, layer 5. I'm going to talk a little bit about layer 4 because, as hopefully you know or you'll learn, layer 4 and how we implement layer 4 is absolutely critical to how our video network performs. Layers 1 to 4 is what you'll learn about on the course. That's down in the boiler room. That's the bits and the bytes, the packets, the headers. Wes is much better explaining that than I am. So that's what you'll learn on the course. And a great snippet from Wes to remember this 7-layer stack, starting at the bottom. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. So ingrain that on your mind. Don't throw away sausage. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. Now, it gets a little, so protocol. So what is protocol? Well, protocol is a set of rules that govern how data travels from one communicating system to the other. And as we just saw, they're layered on top of each other to form a protocol stack. That way, a protocol at each layer has a specific function, and it gets more complex as you add each layer. So for example, you've heard of an IP address. IP stands for Internet Protocol. This protocol sort of structures how devices on the internet talk to each other. It sits on top of the network layer, and it's overlaid on top of it by the control layer at the transport level. And then on top of that is the hypertext protocol layer. So you're building a layered system, and as you come down it, you add and take away more information so that when you're at the base layer, the physical cable, you have all the routing information, the descriptive information, and everything you need to know to get a packet of data from one machine across your network and back to the other machine. So that's protocol. It gets a little bit confusing because I'm going to talk a little bit about this thing called the simplified protocol stack. So there's my 7 layers down the left-hand side. And you'll see in that sort of greeny box, I've boxed together the top 3. Because when we start talking about video, as opposed to just regular IT, those top 3 layers are usually bunched together. So as we start talking about things like RTMP and RTSP, you'll find that they actually contain elements of those top 3 levels. Some of them only contain 2.5. And in that case, we push some of the session layer down into the transport layer. But fundamentally, in terms of video, we're typically really only dealing with a 5-level stack because those top 3 layers are combined into the protocol that we're talking about. So that bottom layer, I'm sure you all know that. It could be DOCSIS, DSL, cellular, wireless, physical cable, fiber or copper, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. The layer above that is the Ethernet layer. That's the layer at which I do my message delineation. That's where my MAC address sits, my medium access control sits. That's where my device addressing is done. And that's where my fundamental error correction is done. The layer above that, the network layer, that's where you hear IPv4, IPv6, DNS, subnets, DCHP. All of these things Wes will cover in the training that I'll give you all a voucher for. I want to start talking about the transport layer. At the transport layer, there are 3 main protocols, and they're critical to the design and the performance of any video network. They're really actually 2.5. There's TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, and there's UDP, User Datagram Protocol. RTP is really UDP with a bit of extra functionality. So RTP, whenever you see RTP, it always sits on UDP. So there are 2 main protocols, and then there's this half protocol that utilizes UDP, but adds a little bit more functionality. So they're the three main protocols you'll hear about that sit at the transport layer that support video over IP. Doesn't matter what that video is, SMPTE, WebRTC, it's all the same. That's all in those upper application layers. At the transport layer, there's only 2.5, 3, let's call it 3 protocols. So in summary, transport layer protocols. So in summary, TCP, data is transmitted in the form of packets between systems. It includes error checking, which guarantees the delivery and it preserves the order of the packets. TCP is known as a connection system because if you only remember one thing in everything I talked to you about tonight, it's this. TCP creates a connection between the sender and the receiver. UDP is connectionless. It does not create a connection. So if there's one thing you remember all about everything I talk about, it's the difference between TCP and UDP, because that core difference, you'll see threads through everything we talk about as we go through the next 45 minutes. So examples of things that use TCP are HTTP, they're FTP, they're things like email, POP3 and SMPTE. They all use TCP to talk from the from the sender to the receiver. The benefit of TCP is data integrity. I know when I send a file by TCP, I'm going to get the entire file. It's going to be complete. It may take a little bit longer, but it's going to be a complete and accurate file. UDP, remember, does not create a connection. It just sends stuff, irrespective of whether it's been received or not. It just keeps blurting it out. So its benefits and its uses are in time-critical applications. A lot of the early streaming formats, and even many of the streaming formats today, use UDP because they're much lower overhead. TCP, handshake, send to receive, has a quick chat, how's the weather, what you doing, blah, blah, blah. By the time it gets around to sending a packet of video, we're 30 frames in to the Super Bowl. UDP doesn't bother with any of those niceties. It doesn't shake hands. It doesn't say hello. It doesn't talk about the weather. It just blurts the video out. And so you have a dilemma. Do I use TCP, which is secure and I know I'm going to get my video, but it's going to take longer, therefore it's going to have latency, higher latency? Or do I use UDP, where I'm more likely to get my video in a timely way, but I may lose some packets, so it may be jittery or it may break up? So if we look at history, historically TCP was used for production environments. FTP, right? I'm going to FTP you this file. That FTP may be in non-real time. It may take 2 hours, but you know that file is going to be received in pristine condition. And by the way, along the way, you've chatted about the weather and everything else. Whereas UDP was always used for streaming applications, where timely delivery was way more important than quality. Now, that historic distinction is now blurring, because if you think about it, I've got way more processing power than I ever used to have in a computer, and my network bandwidths are increasing. So now I can apply more microprocessor power and more bandwidth to that handshaking and that processing. So the lines are blurring. It's less clear cut, TCP, UDP. So what the hell is this RTP stuff? Okay, so RTP were the first attempts to take UDP, and instead of using proper TCP, to actually create some sort of higher level handshake in the application layer, just to check that I was getting my video. That's why I call it a hybrid, because it takes some of the handshaking that TCP does, it brings it up to the application layer, and it runs it on UDP to try and get the best of both worlds. And I think I talk a bit more about this on the next slide. And for your information, SMPTE 2022, 21, AES 67, all of these modern streaming and video formats are basically using RTP, which is the lower overhead, no handshake at the transport level, UDP, with some sort of handshake going on at a higher level in the application layer. So let's just summarize that, and then I'll pause because I don't want to fry your brains. So in summary, and a bit more about RTP, TCP, slower, more reliable, connection-oriented protocol, perfect for unicast, point to point. UDP, faster, but not guaranteed. Typical applications, live streaming, online gaming, video over IP, voice over IP, but good for unicasting as well, because I'm just blurting out the video. It's a connection-less protocol. You can read the different attributes going down, but let me just point a couple out down the bottom there, look. Second one up, header size for TCP is 20 bytes. Header size for UDP is 8 bytes. TCP is heavy. It needs 3 packets to set up a socket connection before it can send data. You know, like I say, we're 30 frames into the Super Bowl if I'm doing all that kind of stuff. UDP is lightweight, but there's no tracking or ordering of the messages. That's the summary between TCP, UDP. Okay, so what's RTP? Well, RTP is this thing that sits on UDP and tries to create a messaging protocol at a higher level. Because remember now, we're still in the application here. And that's a thing typically called RTSP. So whilst RTP is a transport protocol built upon UDP, it's usually coupled with RTSP, which is a control protocol. And it's at the presentation layer. If you remember, going back to my stack, I said these 3 things often get, these 3 top layers often get like merged together. Well, really TSP to RTSP is at the presentation layer, and it lets an end user command a media server via pause and play using TCP to maintain an end-to-end connection. So if you look at the bottom statement in that gray box, what it's really doing is it's trying to get the best of both worlds. It's when I'm streaming content to a user, it's relying on a combination of reliable transmission over TCP for control and messaging, and at the same time, a best effort delivery over UDP for content delivery. Right, I'm going to pause for a sec. Does all of that so far make sense? Anyone got any questions? Okay, let's move on a little bit. So we've talked about our stack of 4 layers, and we've just really summarized layer 4, the transport layer. We've said there are 3 different protocols in the transport layer: TCP, UDP, and this thing called RTP, which is a bit of a joint venture between TCP and UDP. Now let's talk about all the applications that sit above it. And this is when all the buzzwords start flying. I can beat you guys at buzzword bingo any night of the week. Right, here we go. Deep breath. The granddaddy and grandmummy of all of this is HTML and HTTP. HTML is, as you all know, I'm sure, the standard markup language. Video was added to it, became HTML5. And basically, it'll play video through a web page. HTTP, developed by my good friend Berners-Lee, is the backbone of the internet. It's the ability to click through a link and go to a web page. So it's the link that basically routes your click through to where you want to go. And when you take Wes's course, he'll explain how all of that, clicking on a link, gets converted to bits and bytes way down that stack at a lower level. I'm not going to touch all that. I'm just going to assume you're going to do the course and you're going to learn about HTTP. One of the first sort of file-based video protocols that was used was a thing called FTP, File Transfer Protocol. We talked about it. Well, I was first at Avid in the early 90s. People would say, hey, I'm going to FTP that file to you. You had a horrible interface in the console. You typed in IP addresses and you sent a file basically at the TCP level. And you knew it was going to arrive in good shape because it handshook and it has error correction and it has retransmission and all of that good stuff. But 10 minutes of video might take half an hour to transfer. It's not real time. So let me pause there for a second. You notice something about the use. Those three granddaddy and grandmummy and auntie protocols, the older protocols, are all based on TCP. They're all based on the original TCP. Now, the next two protocols are very similar. HLS, developed by Apple, and MPEG-. These are both HTTP-based file transfer protocols. You remember when I talked about UDP? If we go beyond HLS and Dash, down to RTC and some of the others, we start seeing the more streaming protocols, and you see that a lot of those are based on UDP. Now, the big problem with UDP, and I guarantee you everyone on this call has had it but didn't know why, is because you've tried to stream a UDP-based protocol and your firewall will not let it through. Firewalls do not like UDP. There's no negotiated message. There's no negotiated connection. I'm blurting out video or something with UDP. That gives our Russian friends, the Czechs, whoever it is, great opportunity to stick crap in there that will put malware on a machine. So typically, firewalls natively will block UDP unless you open specific ports for them. So the next time someone comes running to your office and goes, hey, I can't get this thing to stream to YouTube, figure out what protocol it's using. I almost guarantee you it's because the firewall's blocking it. And I almost guarantee you it's because it's using one of these lower, not lower in interest, but bottom half of the screen UDP protocols that firewalls don't like. So why am I talking about firewalls? Well, let me come back to HLS and Dash. HLS and Dash are relatively new streaming formats. They've been developed over the last few years. And they're not really streaming formats. What they are is multiple web pages. So like when you click http simptine.com or whatever, I load the Simpty web page. If I did that 25 times a second and loaded 25 different web pages, guess what? I'd have video. So HLS and Dash are both HTTP-based streaming protocols that really aren't streaming at all. They're just loading lots of individual web pages. And they give lots of advantages in this world that we live in. Advantage number one, big obvious fella, firewalls think you're loading a website, they let you through. So you don't have the firewall issue that you would normally have with UDP. Thing number two, my sending server thinks I'm loading a web page. I might be loading a web page 25 times a second, but a web page is a web page. So I don't need a streaming server. So my hardware implementation on the server end is way simpler than if I was to stream another protocol where I need a proper streaming server. So HLS and Dash are getting a lot of traction, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them in a future slide. They're getting a lot of traction. They're not really streaming formats you're loading multiple still web pages very fast. MPEG Dash, of course, then has adaptive bitrate, meaning that actually there is a feedback loop through TCP. It can tell how well the data is being transferred, and it will adapt the compression on that still web page to match my bandwidth available. So, you know, most people today would say that HLS and Dash are probably, you know, the best streaming formats, but we'll talk a little bit about how we compare all these things. Moving on. So RTC is basically direct comms of audio and video from inside a web page, web real-time communication. This is what we're using right now. Zoom, Skype, everybody uses WebRTC. It's easy to implement. It just requires a web browser. You don't need any special receiving tools. But remember, it's spurting video out. It's not really doing some backwards communication, although there are ways of tuning it so it does that. Now, a lot of people in terms of video would say RISC, the Reliable Internet Streaming Protocol, is also becoming a blue-eyed boy of the future. And this again is a high performance media transport using RDP and UDP. It avoids the limitations and the overhead of TCP, but it adds what is known as a NAC-based retransmission ARQ, meaning an acknowledgement request system. And we're going to talk about ARQ as a separate topic in a minute. So let me come back to that. But fundamentally, imagine what's happening. We're using UDP, we're spurting the stuff over there, and then at the application layer, we've got an acknowledged based system that enables us to come back to the sender and say, we didn't get that, or can you retransmit it, or whatever. But a lot of these protocols that are increasing the performance of UDP, remember the backwards loop, the feedback loop is not being done at the transport layer like TCP, it's being done above it in the application layer. So moving on, SRT from Haivision, Secure Reliable Transport, does pretty much the same thing. It provides TCP type reliability using UDP, so it's very low latency. Originally, it was designed for fast file transmission. They added features to it. They actually bought it. It was originally, I think, developed by Nortel or someone like that up in Ottawa. And they've added features to it to support some minimal feedback to give you basically secure, reliability. NDI from our friends at NewTek VisRT now. It, again, they've transitioned NDI. It originally sat on TCP. The big differentiator was it uses MDNS, DNS. It's all in Wes's course. He'll explain dynamic naming, etc. It's all in there. It uses MDNS for self-discovery. So the big differentiator of NDI is when you connect an NDI object to a network, you can see it. It'll self-discover. It'll say, hey, I'm here, yada, yada, yada. And you can then see it from your whatever you've connected to it. A lot of our connections with cameras and even, you know, if even PCs now, we use NDI. But the initial versions 1 and 2, were all based on TCP. I believe now version 3 of NDI is started using it on UDP. So again, the reason to go to UDP is to get higher bandwidth, right? Why don't we use TCP? It has too big an overhead, it's too slow. How do we counter that? If we're sending video, we have to compress it more highly. We have to compress it to have a smaller size of video so it fits over my network that's got high packet to and fro. If I don't have that high packet to and fro, I can use less compressed video. That's why NDI want to start using UDP. And then finally, we'll mention if you like, the first protocol that everybody started using, which is RTMP, real-time messaging protocol. RTMP, I put down the bottom because it's really, it's what powered Flash. And with Adobe Flash now sort of becoming, you know, old hat, RTMP usage is dropping dramatically. But it's a TCP-based protocol. It splits the streams into fragments. The size is negotiated dynamically between the client and server to match the bandwidth. But, you know, this is the dilemma that designers of networks are constantly battling. Okay, so now I'm negotiating what size I send based on the bandwidth of my network. But in negotiating, I'm also taking up time. So I'm fighting this constant battle between latency and compression. And that's what, you know, the battle between TCP and UDP is all about. It's a battle between latency, time, because I'm handshaking, I'm chatting about the weather, versus quality and bandwidth. Right. Got through that slide without a breath. Did I take a breath? Okay. Any questions? Because we've already covered a lot and it's only 20 to 8.
Yeah, Graham, good to see and hear you again.
Mr. Torelli, how are you?
It has been a while. I'm in your time zone now, finally. We're up in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
ARQ, help me. My Comrex days are long gone.
Oh, look, here's a slide. Joe, did I plant you?
I pay attention.
Did I plant you?
The master of segues. Okay, I'll go
There
back.
you go, you see. What is ARQ? So ARQ, and I keep stressing, remember, it's not at the transport layer, it's above that. It stands for automatic repeat request. Sometimes I believe it's automatic repeat query. People have different names for it. It's an error control method using acknowledgements, ACKs and NACKs. A NACK is a negative acknowledgement, an ACK is an acknowledgement. It's used along with timeouts to basically improve reliability over unreliable transport layer protocols such as, well, there is only one, over UDP. So, you know, look at the words there. It uses acknowledgements and timeouts to achieve reliable data transmission over an unreliable communication channel such as UDP. And the way it works is it has a sort of sliding window. So it'll send a packet, but of course, by the time the packet is received and an acknowledgement is sent back, maybe 5 or 6 packets worth of time has gone by. So that's why you need the timeout. And you can set the parameters. And if it doesn't receive a packet, it will discard the previous packets until it receives a packet that gets acknowledged. Typically, these systems have an end stop in that if it's receiving a lot of, if it's not receiving a lot of packets and it hasn't got a buffer big enough, it'll just blurt it through and your picture will start to deteriorate. But assuming the amount of lost packets is within the spec of the buffer of the received device, it's a way of improving transmission quality over an unreliable network. Now, there's several variants. I think there's 3 main variants. This stop and wait ARQ, I think the name itself is pretty standard. The go back and ARQ, which I think is the one I'm showing, and then the selective repeat or selective reject ARQ. But they're all variations on this window that's sliding along as your packets are coming in, going acknowledge, 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 acknowledge. Oh, nothing. Wait, 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 acknowledge. Discard all that stuff, start again. That's sort of how it works. And these protocols can reside at a lower layer. And again, it depends how all-consuming your application is. When you load your application, the video application, does it go down and dick with, that's a technical word meaning modify, does it go down and dick with the layer 2, or does it stay at layer 4? So these sort of ARQ protocols basically can reside in layer 2 or layer 4. That's ARQ. What else are we going to talk about? Oh, codecs versus protocols. So it's very important that you're really clear about the difference between a codec and a protocol. Codec, of course, comes from the merge of two words, and depending on which books you read, it's either encoder and decoder, or it's compress and decompress. Pretty much the same thing. An encoder encodes or compresses the video for transmission or storage, and the decoder does the opposite. There's two types of compression. I don't need to tell you guys this. You know, we grew up with this stuff. There's MPEG and JPEG, and I listed the attributes, the table on the side. Just to make sure everyone's really clear, MPEG is interframe, meaning it looks at the first frame, the second frame, the third frame, the fourth frame. It drills a hole through all of them, and it throws away that data. JPEG is interframe, so sorry, intraframe. So it just looks at field 1 and field 2 and removes data between those two. That gives them very definite use cases, right? MPEG is great for transmission where you don't need any production, any packaging, you're just transmitting. So it's all about, you know, the smallest data rate, because interframe compression is always going to give you the highest compression rate. It's going to get the most stuff out. JPEG is used for contribution where production and packaging is required, because basically JPEG is editable. I don't have to reconstruct 30 frames before I can start editing it, which is what I have to do with MPEG. If I'm doing an inter-frame compression over 30 frames, I'm probably getting phenomenal compression rate. I'm getting the data rate way down, but to put it back together, I need more time, I need more microprocessing power. So that's the difference. All of the other stuff we talked about, all of those protocols, all those ways of packaging video, they can package anything. They can package full bandwidth, SDI, they can package JPEG, J2000, they can package the most highest compression rate, HEVC or VP9. Doesn't matter to the protocol. The protocol is purely the communication system and the method of transferring bits and bytes over that network, the transport protocol. What we do before that is up to us, and it's all part of the system design that says, well, actually, guys, I'm going to use a less reliable transport that's got less overhead, because then I have to compress it less. It's all part of the overall design. And I've sort of tried to list all the different examples of MPEG. So, you know, pretty much all of the big noise that's made these days, MPEG 4, H.265, VP9 from Google, HEVC, these are all MPEG compression formats. They're all interframe. They're also, that means they compress a lot. They throw a lot of data away. It also means they can use very thin bandwidths, network bandwidths, but it means typically they're high latency and they need a lot of horsepower to put them back together. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, took a lot of people to put him back together. That's MPEG. So let's put things into perspective. The streaming latency continuum. When I press the go button on my 1-inch machine in Comcast's headquarters, I typically get the video 5 seconds later. Typically, may vary. You know, where I live in Newburyport, we're in a small place, we probably get it 10 seconds later. But if you're in a metropolitan area, you probably get it 5 seconds later. That 1-inch machine at Comcast sure doesn't good. At the right-hand end, I'm up to 45 seconds of latency. At the left-hand end, I'm instant. I'm down to nothing. So in terms of the nearest sort of real-time format that we've talked about is WebRTC. No frills, just splurts the old video out there. We're all using it now. Because our networks are getting so good, we're actually getting pretty good video. We're actually getting pretty good audio. because our networks every year just get bigger and bigger, in more and more bandwidth, and our processing engines get better and better. So WebRTC, that's why it's sort of a darling child at the moment, because it really does provide good video very fast without bells and whistles. Then we've got SRT and RTSP and RTP and all that good stuff. And RIST actually is in there. I'm using the wrong diagram. I added RIST. Low latency, typically less than 5 seconds. Just ignore the variance of HLS and Dash for the time being. RTMP, which was what powered Flash, pretty much same as cable. And then look at far right, ignoring the tuned versions, Apple HLS and MPEG Dash. I can't spell, MGEP. Actually, it was the lovely Sarah prepared this slide. It's MPEG Dash, not MGEP Dash. So these are the things I thought, remember what they're doing. They're using HTTP over TCP. They've got a massive overhead, which is why they're so slow. Now they are being talked about as the future because you can tune them, you can play around with them, you can reduce the overhead. And the other big thing you got to remember is they solve a lot of problems. They solve infrastructure problems with servers, they solve firewall problems. And everybody that looks at this chart goes, well, who cares? Because in the next year, you know, we'll have 10 times the processing power and we'll have twice the network bandwidth. So all that's ever going to happen is that those two streaming formats are going to become closer and closer to the middle as processing power gets better. But that sort of frames where all these buzzwords that you hear sit on what I call actually Wowser calls it, the latency continuum. Make sense? So let's talk a little bit about streaming protocols. So if you looked at my list, you know, a lot of what we talked about was streaming protocols. And I'm sort of now going to differentiate between streaming protocols, and then one of my next slides talks about SMPTE protocols to try and differentiate them so you can see. So online video delivery these days uses both streaming and HTTP based. We talked a little bit about HTTP based. RTMP, what was behind Flash, you know, gave us a great starting point, but it needed dedicated servers. HTTP, I've already covered this, just use regular web servers. But there are also other handfuls of emerging HTTP-based HLS and MPEG Dash that are tuned, which try and do a bit of both. They try and use some sort of handshaking at a higher level, whilst just rushing the video out at a lower level. So when you're choosing streaming protocols, you have to select the right protocol to define what you're trying to do. So latency, playback compatibility, and viewer experience can all be impacted by the streaming protocol that you choose. I mean, most operators, most systems will use different contribution protocols from delivery protocols. That makes sense, right? Because on my contribution side, it's all about quality and knowing I'm getting, you know, good files, good video. On the delivery side, it sort of doesn't matter as much if I get a stutter or if I lose the audio for a second. And so you can see how big companies now are using different protocols at different ends of the process. And as I've said earlier, that last point down the bottom there, streams deployed using HTTP are technically not streams. They're progressive downloads. They give you very good quality and viewer experience, no matter the connection, software, or device. And I think I nicked this off the Wowser website. They're big into HTTP, HLS, and MPEG Dash because they're seen as a sort of future. This concept of, you know, I don't need a special server. It goes through firewalls. It might have a lot of overhead. I can tune that overhead out right now. But then I can add some back as my processing power and my network bandwidth increases. So the new SMPTE standards, on the other hand, there's a lot more thought, let's say, gone into them. So SMPTE, and I saw you had a thing on SMPTE 2022 before, so I don't want to steal someone else's thunder because I know you already had a presentation on SMPTE 2022. 2022 is a whole suite of standards that describes how to send digital media, including full bandwidth SDI, non-compressed, over an IP network using RTP. Be really clear. So it uses RTP, that version of UDP that has a little feedback loop, not TCP that is fully communicating. So then what it does, you know, there's a high bit rate version called HBRMT that is for contribution oriented networks up to 3 gig. And then there's SMPTE 2110, which is a subset of 2022. And it's really designed around live production. It's designed for live production. And it has several major differences to SMPTE 2022. And in fact, 2110 is probably better for everything because of these differences. And the three differences really, or the three differences really are, it breaks the video down or the media into individual essences. So you might have video, you might have multiple audios, you might have well, you won't have time code, you might have closed captioning. So like a JPEG MP4 clip could have 9 essences, video, 6 audios and 2 closed caption. Someone told me like a third of the world speak Chinese, so I thought I better put Chinese on there. So that's the first big difference. It sends all the media in its individual essence. The second big difference is it uses this thing called SIP, which manages the connection and the distribution of the RTP streams. So it's sort of built its own TCP return layer, but up at that higher layer. And then the third key thing that's different is PTP. The fact that it sends a timing protocol so you know exactly where that stream sits on a timing plane. And what that enables you to do is to synchronize multiple sources and multiple essences, which is what you need for live remote production. So it sits on, in effect, UDP. It uses elements of RTP to communicate back, and then it has its own set of feedback loops for timing, for managing the stream, and all that good stuff. So fundamentally, it's RTP with a layer on top of it that has been designed by video engineers trying to solve real-time video problems of live production over a network. Does that make sense? Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about security, and then I'm going to talk about ports. And by that, I suspect you're probably networked out. So,
quick question, Graham.
yes.
Could you explain the TR-04?
Oh God, no! Get a video guy to do that. Look, I'm not the expert on SMPTE at all. Wes is, and did your person who went through this not do it all with you? I believe it's part of the timing. I mean, I can look it up for you. I just don't have it in my head.
Okay.
I mean, we can always, if you want, do an SMP. I mean, I can always do an SMPTE tutorial. I just need to look up a couple of things. But I figured you already had one, so I focused on the network protocol layer and the application layer.
No, it's fine. There's a lot to digest here.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know the difference truly between TR-04 and 03. Within the family of standards, there are so many different standards for different bits. I do have a standard stack for SMPTE somewhere. I just don't have it to hand and open on my desk, but I can certainly look it up. A lot of it's to do with over time, how the standard developed. It started as 22-6 and then TR-04 and 03 was added. I think they're the timing standards, and it all became 2110. That's how I kind of look at it. I don't know if that's right. So once you're in the IP domain and you've compressed your video and you've decided which transport protocol you're going to use, or which application protocol you're going to use, and which transport protocol it's going to use, then you can apply standard IP internet security. And that's generally called TLS, Transport Layer Security. And basically all it does is you get somebody to come and look at your website, or they crawl over your website and they issue you a certificate, which is known for historic reasons as an SSL certificate. And then when your connection starts at TCP level, the first thing it does, you type in your HTTP, whatever, it goes off, it checks that there's a security certificate, it comes back with an acknowledgement, it goes hello, it comes back, goes yes, and off you go, you're off to the races, and you're communicating in a secure, encrypted way. And I don't know if you've noticed, but more and more people like Google Chrome, they sort of almost now refuse to connect you to a website that doesn't have a security certificate. You'll see a little padlock and you have to go through a sub-menu before they'll let you in. Because what they're really trying to promote is if everybody's got a secure website, we won't have junk flying around the internet, basically. But they're sort of trying to do it, and it's very irritating because I still use some websites that are not secure. What TLS encryption does, it really is at the HTTP protocol level. So it adds an S and it adds encryption. So it hides the data being transferred from third parties. It does the authentication, the handshake, and it also verifies the data has not been forged or tampered with. So again, you know, this is part of being part of the bigger IT club. We don't have to design a transport security layer because we just use what was designed for IP. So there are a lot of good reasons to be in the IP club, putting video over IP. Several bad reasons, like it's never designed for it. I guess SMPTE is becoming the closest, the 2110. But there's a lot of reasons you do it, to take advantage of things like this. And there's lots of big brains constantly working on this stuff, improving the security layer. So a note on ports. So ports, the way ports work, so think of a port as an extension on your telephone exchange. So I call your IP address and I want, you know, extension 80. Well, 80 is what's typically used in TCP for all my HTTP messaging. Or I call and I want 110. Well, my PC knows if it's 110 that it's email, right? POP3, SMPT use, I think, well, POP3 certainly uses 110. So in TCP and UDP, they both use ports to separate data for different applications. And one IP address or one device with one IP address can have multiple different ports open, each one supporting a different application. So that's why, you know, I can be using the web through port 80 and sending email using port 110 and differentiate the data. In TCP, the port numbers are typically assigned by the sender, but they're handshaken and agreed by the receiver. And sometimes you can negotiate to a different port that's a non-standard port. You know, I'm thinking back to my Avid days. We used to do this a lot. If you had an Avid system in the 20th Century Fox film lot, they were terrified you were going to steal their content. And so we couldn't dial in and diagnose the machines. So they'd give us a special port. So we would shift, we'd come in through 80 and say, hello. It's a bit like VHF radio, move to channel 82. Okay, we'll move to channel 82. So it can be negotiated in TCP because remember, this is a connection protocol. I'm talking sender receiver. In UDP, there is no negotiation, right? Port numbers are just generated and then it blurts out. And that's why firewalls don't like it, because it's not a negotiation and the firewall doesn't know what incoming port to send it to, right? It's kind of fishing around. The receiver sort of figures it out, but it's not clear cut to the firewall. And so that's why they typically block UDP. And typical ports used by UDP are 16384 through to 32767. I just made a note there for those of you that are in the bowels of NDI. NDI typically is, well, versions 1 and 2 are TCP protocols. They use 5960, 49152 to 65535. Broadcast Pix, if anyone's got Broadcast Pix machines, just to give you an idea, our soft panel control, which is fundamentally a website, as you'd expect, uses 80. And then we have assigned websites for different controls. So our API control is 99.95. Our remote panel control is 99.98. So when you're installing one of these things in your machine room and you've got your control panel somewhere else or your control panel at home, this is when you grab the IT guy, you put a screwdriver to his throat and you say, please open these ports. Otherwise, your control panel will not communicate with your switcher. BPNet, you can see, right? So functionalities, when you design the system, is going to have a port. You've got to make sure that port can be opened so that you've got communication. And this is the #1 source of problems we find as we put in remote installs with control panels in different places. It's because the IT department's got the router that locked down with a firewall and we can't get through it on the right port. So if you think about, another term is a socket. What is a socket? Well, a socket is like an extension and a telephone number either end. So I've got an IP address either end, I've got a port this end, and I've got a port that end, and I'm just literally going from a port through my IP address across the network. I'm probably doing some IP address translation, which Wes will cover in the course, and then I'm coming out into another machine into a port. So a socket is this unique combination of IP address and port number that can be used to establish a secure link between two devices, typically on different networks. Okay, I just left this slide in. I took most of my basic slides out because of the course, but just to make sure you understand, obviously, as part of those ports, the difference between a public IP address and a local and a private IP address. So everybody here is probably sitting on a router where your IP address is 192.168 something, 110, 100, 130. What your router does, it's a door between a private and a public network. It does a translation from your 192 to something that Comcast or your provider is given your house. And in this drawing, the little drawing on the right, Comcast has given me 6430.230.12. That's my unique IP address for the router that's under this table that can be seen by the entire world. Once it comes through that router, it obviously gets translated to whatever device sent the query. So if I'm using HTTP, I will have sent it from my laptop here, which might be 192.168.1-10. It'll have gone through the router. It'll have been address translated, or the first part of it. It'll lose the 192 blah, blah, blah. It'll remember the 10, because when it comes back, that bit's stripped out. And it's just important to realize this is a great example of how data is added and taken away as I go up and down that layer stack. And all I'm really doing now is saying, hey, just remember, it's a door. The router's a door. If you don't go into that router and open the door for the port, it's not going to get through. And like I say, the course, I keep talking about it, but all the basic networking stuff I sort of took out of this presentation because I figured, Wes is a way better teacher than I am, so you can go and do it in his course. Another quick note on just a quick sort of reminder, unicast and multicast, one-to-one unicast, TCP, right? I negotiate, I talk. Multicast needs to be UDP or RDP, because in multicast, I want to go one-to-many, and therefore I can't set up a one-to-many conversation using TCP. Okay, just about finished. Free training. Go to this website, click on the link, type in Broadcast Pix free, and you get about a 3-hour course. You can take it at your leisure. It's got little exams at the end of each section, all about the bottom 3 layers in that ISO stack. The real deep bowels of how networking works, how the packets all work. Remember, all I've tried to cover is the transport layer up. Transport layer down, this training course. And I thought I'd finish by going back to this drawing. Now you can suddenly see all those buzzwords, right? So if I look at cameras, typically IP cameras these days, the little ones, they spit out either NDI or RTSP. We use a thing called Stream by Castus. I'm sure you guys know about it. What does Stream actually do? Stream is a protocol converter. So if you're lazy like we are, we don't have enough engineers to keep on top of all these streaming formats, Castus will take multiple different formats, such as WebRTC from Zoom, and convert it to something that we can then take in. So all Castus really does, and they'll kill me if they hear me say this, is convert various protocols to other protocols so that people like us don't have to support 50 different protocols. Internally, for control, we use TCP and WebRTC. Why do we use 2? Well, the control panel, it's all about making sure when I push a button, that button push is received at the switcher engine and it's acted upon. So I need a direct communication. However, we also have web pages. So we can have a control panel that is really a web page. In that case, I want to see the streaming video in the window. I want to look at it. And in that case, we use WebRTC. So coming back from our switcher, we send in a WebRTC stream. So I'm using HTTP, I'm logging on to a website, and it's sending me WebRTC. Now, one of the beauties of WebRTC is, and we're just about to release some new functionality, probably a couple of months, is it's bidirectional. So I can do things like I can add a talkback, or I can add kind of a Zoom-like functionality. Like I can be using a control panel, talking to the operator in the control room, and he can be looking at me, assuming I've given the resource of my camera to him as well. So RTC can be used in a web page to take control of local resources. You can use it for ingesting things back over the network. You can use it for talking, and then you can use it for streaming video back. So it's a very useful format, but it's one of the fastest, as you saw, real time, but also one of the most unreliable because it doesn't use any feedback. That's why we then use TCP for the control functionality. So we used 2 different streaming formats or 2 different formats for the control surface. And then when we output from the network, obviously we can have a video spigot on the machine, but also we then use switchboard, and they sort of do the opposite of Castus. So we can give a single stream to switchboard, and they can then send that to multiple sites, multiple formats. So, you know, there are these sort of businesses like Castus and Switchboard who basically are making their money by doing format conversion, protocol conversion from multiple different input protocols to multiple different output protocols to something that most people use. And it saves us as a manufacturer having to develop 27 different streaming protocols. We can just use an aggregator or disaggregator, as in the case of Switchboard. Whew. Wow. I think that's me done.
Graham, thank you very much. My head is spinning, but I want to take that other course as well by Wes. And maybe could you put that up again so everyone make sure everyone gets it?
Well, I'll send you this
Okay,
thing, and you.
there we go.
Just if you click on that link.
Send me the PowerPoint and I will add it to the clip playback on the website so people can follow along.
Anyone got any questions, or have I completely, I don't know what the word is,
Bamboozled us all.
bamboozled you all? I mean, was it used?
I know a course is good when at the end of it I have more questions than answers, but
Was it useful?
Yes.
I mean, I find the reason I sort of tried to cover everything was because you sit in meetings and conversations and people just bamboozle you. And when you call them on it, half the time they don't actually know what you're talking about. They don't actually know, you know, and so you say, well, what do you mean RTSP? Oh, well, okay. Well, here, you know, if you remember a few things, just keep this as a reference. Where is it? This chart as a reference. You know, remember the difference between TCP and UDP, and remember RTP is kind of a version of UDP, and then just keep this chart as a reference, and you can play buzzword bingo like the best of them.
Where would you have put the wrist on that one timeline?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to do that. Well, I did it, but I used the wrong chart.
Just
So
curious.
wrist sort of is just under a second. It would sit somewhere in, oops, sorry, somewhere in here.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere in here.
All right.
Wrist would sit somewhere there.
Okay.
Where does NDI fit into this?
Oh, that's a good question. I've not got NDI on there, have I? That is a very good question. NDI under, yeah. So I mean, version 1 and 2 are quite would be quite slow, so they'll be up here somewhere. But remember, they heavily compress. So the reason, you know, this doesn't mean how this format turns out, because if I compress the shit out of something, and I can bring the time down. So, you know, because I'm handling less data, because I do the compression before. But in terms of the way this is drawn, NDI would be this side of the 5 seconds, 1 and 2. Version 3, which uses UDP, is probably further this way, but I've not tried it or seen it. But if you think about it, NDI version 1 and 2 sits on TCP. Yeah, and then it depends. I don't know exactly how much they compress.
I think they're actually up to version 4 now, too.
Oh, are they? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. They could well be. It's interesting because, you know, now part of VisRT, I just sort of look at most things they're doing as going more at market. So, but if, you know, obviously contribution and studio production, you know, you need to be both fast and secure. So yeah, be interesting to see. That's why 70-20-20-21-10 potentially is good, but it's very bandwidth hungry. So again, you know, it's going to require fairly dedicated networks within studio environments and even across country. I think that's sort of the main thing you realize.
What about the cellular networks?
Well, I don't know
What
what
about
I mean, any of these will go over a cellular network. Again, you're back to this
Right.
equation of, you know, once you've got an IP stream, it'll go anywhere that IP goes. And bear in mind, a cellular network is really a VoIP network
Right.
these days. And so you're back to, how do I construct the stream? And how do I construct that stream is two things. What protocol do I use? And what compression do I use? So you have this constant battle. You know, if you look at someone like Netflix, for example, you know, they stream in something like 83 different formats. Now, some of those you can convert on the fly, and some they have to store. And each of those formats is for a different screen via a different connection. And so your phone will receive a different stream when you're at home on the Wi-Fi to what it would receive when you're out and about on the network. So sort of break down, think about it as, the network's your pipe. The pipe could be your home Wi-Fi. That's that sort of lower level. It could be a piece of fiber optic cable. It could be a 5G signal to your phone. That's your pipe. What you put down that pipe then goes up that stack. And when you get to the transport layer, which is where we've been focused, this is when you're playing with the dynamic of how much bandwidth do I have? What protocol do I use? And how much do I compress before I feed it into the protocol? And that's what you're playing with to try and get the best user experience.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Graham? Well, hearing none, I want to thank you very, very much. That was an excellent presentation. And please remember, if you want to get into this more and get some of the things that weren't touched on tonight, is to go to this website and listen to Wes's 3-hour presentation. Wes Simpson, I don't think his last name was mentioned.
That's correct, yeah.
Yep. And please come back on March 17th for the ATSC 3.0 presentation. Should be excellent and very much in depth. But it's coming. It's definitely on its way. A lot of manufacturers are making the equipment now. So pleasure to see all of you. And if you want to view this again, you can view it at simpty-ne.org. And wish you all.
It'll take about a day to post.
Say again, Bob?
It'll take about a day to post.
Yeah, this will be up.
And Graham, if you could send me the PowerPoint, I'll put this next to it.
Okay.
Also want to thank Russell Whitaker of Broadcast Pix for making the connections here to make this happen. And a lot of people do a lot of work to make these monthly meetings happen. And I'm only responsible for a very small part of it. And of course, Paul Beck, bless his soul, is just, and Bob Lamb, both, and all of our managers just do a great job. So I'm looking forward to come back to normal and see all of you as well. But I think the streaming is going to work very well for us in the future as well. So thanks again and good night.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks.
Take care and be safe.